Start the reading for a few more moments just to give people a chance. It's right now 5:59 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. I am William F. DeVault, and I'm going to do a reading this morning of my book, Gentle into That Good Night. Today would have been my mother's birthday. She passed a couple years ago, and I just wanted to do this in her honor. I also found out a good friend of mine, Tara Cameron, her mother passed a few years back yesterday, so I'd like to partially dedicate this reading to her. The book I'll be reading from, Gentle into That Good Night, great cover, yeah? I'll explain that cover in a moment. I had started working on it after my father passed away about 5 years ago, and in the course of putting it together, my mother passed away. So I went ahead and expanded it and set it up for that. The cover photo to the book was actually taken by my brother David, who is a superior amateur photographer. That's actually a picture of a man walking along the Monongahela River the morning of my father's funeral. And the wind chill factor that day was -15, which is referenced in one or two of the poems about his funeral. So let's get to it, shall we? Again, the name of the book is Gentle into That Good Night, and I am William F. DeVault. First poem. Inconvenience. Time is not your concern now. We are still of the world, where moments are measured, treasured memories spun like the cotton candy you should not, could not, but would steal a pinch of. Anyway, I digress. In the end, I confess this was not something that I was adequately prepared myself for. More concerned with the outward facade that I might crack a joke, a poke at the solemn who feel a sense of loss. The inevitable is a measure of faith. Love is in evidence here. The profound sound of hope. This was the death I feared even as a child. Cold to my mortality, but as inconvenient. A friend asking favor. When I was very young, I came to my own understanding of death. I was about 8, and cried for days, projecting forward to the inevitable deaths of my parents. And for years I swore the only funeral I would ever attend would be my father's. No insult to my mother, but I just find funerals incredibly barbaric. And so that's how it goes. I mentioned earlier how cold it was the morning that my father was interred at Arnottsville Cemetery in West Virginia. This poem is about that. It's called Graveside. 15 degrees below zero, wind chill at Graveside. Sound doesn't penetrate, the family is here. Blessed are they that mourn. I and Josh are windbreaks for my mother. The honor guard waits nearby, waits patiently in the cold to take their turn and fire at the sky. Dad's lucky, he is beyond the cold. Mom is not. I am not. Josh is not. I am uncaring, not apathetic, ambivalent. For the occasion of his funeral, I had hurried in so quickly, I had forgotten to bring a dress shirt. And those who know me know I generally do not wear a jacket or coat even when it's very cold outside. So I hurriedly bought a shirt at a local men's store and wore it. And I didn't really realize until we got to the graveside just how damn cold it was. 15 below zero was the wind chill. But I'm pretty resistant to the cold. And my nephew Josh, who's a big hulk of a guy, he and I stood side by side, blocking the wind from my mother as she stood at the graveside. And it was a very intense moment for all of us. And there was an honor guard for, I believe, from the local VFW post, because my dad was a veteran of World War II, that waited patiently for their turn to shoot at the sky and then get back into their cars before they froze to death. I hope none of them took ill from that occasion. The next poem is Shabtis. The pride you took in my accomplishments was gratifying. The testimony of the bookshelf of my books, the posters from my appearances. I left them for now in your study, just in case you linger in this world and need a little reading material. Next up is a poem entitled Timeless. Moments are of no consequence to you now. Neither is the silence. The space between intersecting words. You accepted the darkness with a becoming grace to face a light we cannot comprehend. The space between heartbeats, meaningless when the shell falls away and the gray of life is unmasked as merely a test. You were never good at tests, but you did just fine in this one, the most essential. Now you have time for everything. And silence is not so bad. It gives you time to think, to understand, to find joy. Not so bad in afterlife. We are, perhaps, envious. The next poem is a villanelle entitled Gentle into That Good Night. Perhaps the most famous villanelle in the English language is the one by Dylan Thomas, written for his father when his father was gravely ill. That includes the line, "Do not go gentle into that good night." It was an exhortation to fight death. Well, my dad slipped away very quickly. Early in the day he was fine. Later in the day he was feeling poorly. And by late that evening I got a call from my brother asking me if Dad had made any requests concerning heroic measures. And he was gone by midnight. So this is a little poem for him about his grace in accepting death. You accepted going gentle into that good night. 90 years and some. The drum of your heart now past. Rage never your goal. Peace for the next world, for the light. Memories do not fade, not like sound or sight. A gentle man, duty done and legacy ensured. At last, you accepted going gentle into that good night. Never a burden, never a doubt. No reason we might think anything less than tender thoughts. The die cast. Rage never your goal. Peace for the next world, for the light. Profound the sound of every laugh. A simple sleight of hand and heart. The magic of slipping away fast. You accepted going gentle into that good night. Profound in your assurances, resolved in the night, liberal in your love, all conflicts fade away and are past. Rage never your goal, peace for the next world, for the light. Family and friends surround you in this world, and the bright promise you accept with faith and humility. Reward amassed, you accepted going gentle into that good night. Rage never your goal, peace for the next world, in the light. When I was a young boy, I was in the Cub Scouts. I was never a good Cub Scout. I was never a good Boy Scout. But I was also terrible with hand tools, awful with them. And when I was 8 or 9 in Cub Scouts, we built from a kit shoe shine kits for our dad. And if you don't know what those are like trays with handles that you keep your shoe shining brushes and cloths and shoe polish in. And it was a terrible job I did. The nails were crooked and bent, and I guess I did the varnish okay. But after he had passed, my dad had passed, we found the shoe shine kit in his closet. He was still using it. And so I gave it to one of my sons, passing it along. A badly made shoe shine kit is now a family heirloom. This is called Shoe Shine Kit 1. I was 8 or 9. Couldn't hammer a nail straight, and my expertise with a brush full of varnish left a lot to be desired. But there, in your closet, packed with waxes and rags, sits the shoe shine kit I made for you in my Cub Scout pack 50 years ago. Still holding up, holding on, doing the job it was made for. No concession to better workmanship or newer designs. What works, works. Humans are like this. We are built of the truths of our youths, the scuffs and the stains, and the bent nail assemblage. Tell our tales. As I mentioned, my dad went fairly quickly, and actually my mother did too, but that's for later on. This is a little poem about getting the sudden news. It's called "And This Just In." You are gone. Not unexpected at your age, but never anticipated as something to happen in the moment. The skies open up, the light fades. But only to our eyes. You have gone on ahead, not deserting us, but preparing the way. Our flurried activities to rush to where we are harbinger of the past, casting our lots for the necessities and comfort we may provide. Odd and random thoughts, weather and work and obligations, dropping like hot skillets grabbed and then released to fall. That was an in-joke for him, even though he wasn't around to hear it. He once handed me a hot skillet when I was doing dishes. He was oblivious to the fact it was hot, and so was I until I grabbed it. My dad was also an avid hunter, and he practiced night after night after night after night in our dining room, doing turkey calls. He had a little box that he would scrape from side to side, and it made a sound supposedly like a turkey. I don't know, because I don't think he ever got a turkey. But he was determined. And this poem is called Turkey Call. The strange memories that persist, resisting time, to stick like chewing gum on the sides of cheap tennis shoes. The sound of the handheld turkey call from the kitchen as you played the recording over and over and tried to match sound for sound, cadence for cadence, convinced that this would end the drought of wild turkeys on the table. Not that anyone was complaining. Hamburger was just fine, with a butterball for Thanksgiving and Christmas. That high-pitched, gritty sound, like nails on a soft chalkboard. Sets of three. First the record, then you, oblivious to just how annoying the sound was. Determined to get it right. Convinced that this was the way to prove yourself. While Joey next door accidentally got two with a single shot. Now that must have burned. And offered us one. The sound went on. Night after night after year. I'd gladly listen to it all night, every night, just to have you back. When I was a kid, I was not athletic. It wasn't until later in life that I found out I had some skill as a runner, some talent as a runner, just in time to dislocate both ankles and end my track career before it started. It used to frustrate the heck out of my dad and my older brother Robert, trying to teach me how to hit a ball in the backyard. This one's called Taking Swings. How I frustrated you. Underhanded pitches, just trying to get me to connect with anything. Wild swings. We did not know yet that I needed glasses. You and Robert trying to motivate me to little avail. I was not the baseball sort. Not made for most sport. Truth is, it wasn't just the glasses. My mom never knew this, and I never told her. But my dad would give me really, really, really solid, good, amazing advice out of earshot to her. Mom thought she ran the roost. So if I was in the middle of a problem, Dad would take me aside and say, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. Don't tell your mother. And this poem's about that. It's called Good Advice Given in Secret. How many times did you take me aside, out of earshot of Mom, to give me some simple, straightforward advice I was not to repeat, just act upon? I usually did, just wanted to let you know. We wouldn't speak about it later, and often the machinations were such that it was never obvious which door I took. No breastfeeding, no questions, like a father would, should, and could give. Always appreciated, although sometimes I wondered what specific life experiences gave you the perspective driving the piece of advice, hard-earned wisdom from either your own life or the observation of others. We don't really notice slow, gradual changes unless we snapshot them. And I remember looking back how over the last few years of his life, my dad was starting to slow down. I mean, he was 90 years old. And I wrote this poem about that. Fading. We are all given, if we live long enough. And 90 certainly is a goodly span to fade. Eyesight and hearing, nearing the other end of the scale, a little slower getting down the hall. Not ghosts yet, but reminded of our mortality. Matter of fact. The words came down, matter of fact, that you were gone. Slipped quietly out the side door while the angels held it open for you. A quick jog to the chariot and off, before anybody really noticed. And the slight of the light that you used to cover your exit was exposed. So late at night that we were all blurry with exhaustion and spread out over 3 states, so that there was no time for a dramatic deathbed scene, which suited you just fine. You never were one for the drama. Just a country boy going home one last time as the sun went down. I think I may mention it in a later poem, but my dad's last words were actually, "I'm okay, I'm okay." Pretty good last words. Shoeshine kit 2. Yeah, told you there was another one. Lacquered wood, poorly nailed by young hands. I remember more than once turning to the den mother, a very patient Mrs. Hott, and telling her I couldn't do it. The nails wouldn't go in straight, and I was making a mess of it. But she convinced me to persevere and make the shoeshine kit for my father. I inherited it when he passed, full of waxes and brushes and cloths of various age and condition, because he recognized both the utility of it, even a block to brace your heel on, and the effort I put into it, like people whose talents might not always be obvious, but worth keeping around in case you need a quick buff. My parents believed in corporal punishment. I don't think I'm permanently damaged because of it. I'm not a big fan of it, having been on the receiving end, sometimes for not even real slights, sometimes for perceptional slights. But Mom usually, when she spanked us in the moment. Dad usually, when he spanked us, was directed by Mom to get the belt. The belt. Mom set the rules, but you were her enforcer of last resort. When the threats didn't work, corporal punishment got promoted. Just an ordinary belt, not the razor strop or miner's belt we had heard the horror stories of. No hooks and such to rip the flesh off you. Just enough leather to penetrate a layer of denim and one of cotton and a thick skull by conduction. I never got the sense you particularly enjoyed having to be the bad cop, and maybe that's why it was easy to forgive when I felt the crime just didn't deserve the thick sound punctuated by my howls. Like something out of a pirate movie, the sound of whips just before the hero is made to walk the plank. I noticed in this poem, I do make reference to him saying I'm okay. My sister, Becky, who is a very distinguished nurse, her husband is a lay minister in addition to his other jobs, and he gave the eulogy at my dad's funeral. And I want to thank him for that. This is called Eulogies and Other Words. Frank gave the eulogy because he's the minister in the family. Every family needs a minister, a doctor, a lawyer, and someone who knows how to fix a car, or at least someone with strong opinions in all these areas. It was good. It was heartfelt. It was true to what Dad would have wanted. Simple, unadorned, Never much for pageantry. Never much for making a fuss like his final words. I'm okay. This next one is about my brothers and sister. And it was interesting as Dad went from he was fine to going to the hospital to passing, how the phone chain went, because only 2 of the 5 were local. 2 of us 5 were local. And so we had to at various times determine when we would be leaving and how we would get there and so forth. And this is called SIBS. I've looked back over the conversation online. A group of siblings that came together gradually as the evening wore on. Personalities evident, each dealing with whatever was to come in our own way. This is where the skin is measured in thickness and the ability to let water slide off, and tears. To get to what has to be done next. Hasty preparations on an icy winter's night. To travel, to be there. For Mom, and for one another. To keep promises to ourselves. To play our roles. Without any of the infighting, jockeying for position I have seen in such situations, but not tonight, and not with my sibs. They're a pretty good bunch. And our mother and father raised us right. Tonight, tests. In the museum. Ta-dam. They called them man caves when they were designed and designated. To us it was the computer room. Not the only computer in the house, but where Dad went when he wanted to look up some new plant fertilizer or check mountaineer statistics, even in bad years. The living room sometimes was too chaotic for living, the television needing to be louder, and when there was a crowd, the sounds were overwhelming. But in his inner sanctum, Dad could isolate. Rifling through his drawers filled with old pictures and treatments for dry elbows, the occasional key, he could never remember exactly what it was for. A receipt too old to read where it was from, or for how much. Walls adorned with gifts that couldn't go anywhere else due to space or taste or just because. He got outvoted about putting the singing fish in the living room. The Museum of the Man. Memories. Evocations of moments never really lost. A shrine to him, to his wife, and to the children and grandchildren he loved, and still does. The undodged curtain for my mother. I did not watch them shovel the rude earth over your mortal remains. For that is not how I would remember you, celebrate you. How many times had you dodged the curtain? More than I knew, no doubt. But it comes to this, a separation of mother and children, by the very ground we walked upon just weeks ago, laying flowers on my father's grave you now lay beside. Blessed are they who mourn. Comfort, like fresh cinnamon rolls upon returning home on a rough day from school, or a midnight talk pledged to secrecy after one more unpleasant truth has come out of the shadows, offered up in a promise of peace. That is anathema to the nature of life. The rocking chair where fresh nightmares were rhythmically pushed away, long gone, long gone. But even in the metaphoric sense, given to inertia now. One more honor to be given. One more courage owed as a citizen of a kingdom you made sure we embraced, even when it wasn't comfortable, but necessary. Looting the museum. When Dad passed, most things were left in their place. Because Mom still lived there. When Mom passed, we needed to get all the stuff. Decades and decades. They had lived in that house from 1967 until just a couple of years ago. So there was a lot of stuff to figure out what to do with. And I got his desk chair. I use it when I'm working on my computer because I liked it. And I helped buy it. So this poem is called Looting the Museum. Knickknacks and the occasional objet d'art hustled out of the door while each contemplated memory and the artifacts that served no purpose as props of a time not forgotten, but flowed past. Like leaves on a brisk autumn stream, material anecdotes, sometimes with hidden messages, but hurried out the door for the next necessity to, with luck and care, be hustled out other doors, perhaps with lost context, perhaps as exhibits and evidence of a deeper mythology. This next one is called Refugee. There he sits, stunned look, a lost boy, long grown to be a man, contemplating the loss in fractured emotions that the five can only consider at a certain distance, their pain forming the inner ring of hell. An orphan of sorts, old friend, sanctuary closed, the angel placed with flaming sword to ward away when life drives him to sadness and needing some space in a place to choose as Canaan, a lost sixth tribe. That was actually about a good friend of mine, Bob Wasson. We always considered him kind of the sixth DeVault kid. He lived just down the block. His household was something of a mess. And he referred to my mom and dad as Old Man DeVault and Old Lady DeVault. And I remember looking at him at the funeral and seeing somebody who looked a little lost. When my mother was buried, the service included the releasing of a dove. And in the top of a nearby tree, it was noticed there was a hawk. And I guess the hawk kind of staked out the funerals at Arnottsville. And when they released the dove shot like a rocket for the tree line, with the hawk hot on its heels. And a lot of people said, well, that must have been Bill, my dad, as the hawk. And I'm like, I don't think that's exactly how their relationship went, but, you know. Graveside, trees. The hawk waited in the nearby tree, patiently awaiting the release of the dove. Some saw it as the nature of the hawk. Others, as an avatar of Dad waiting for his wife to return to him, comforting but theologically daft. It was not as cold this morning as when we put Dad down for his nap. A more hopeful day. No need for Josh or I to play windbreak. No guns fired into the sky. And the dove got away, and the hawk was still circling, in a profound recall of every lost opportunity as we wandered home to a place that was no longer home. There is a concept in Greek called kairos. Kairos means the right time for something. And I've mentioned in my poems before, kairos over chronos, which is clock time. You know, do things in their right time. Don't do them just because it is time. This poem is called Kairos. It is never the right time in someone's calendar. Somebody always needs just a few more hours or days or years to get one more thing set up, knocked down, or put into position for that illusion of perfection. God or gods or fates or coincidence or kismet or karma, or just a twist of the ankle away from a missed morning message and the sudden dread of a ringing phone, at a time of the morning when telephones are only for the worst of news. One morning, 15 minutes before I would normally get up, I got a call from my brother Robert. It was on April Fool's Day. That just made it all the more bizarre. I answered the phone. Hello? And Brother Robert said, "You awake?" "I am now." "Mom's gone." "What?" "Mom's gone." "Are you sure?" "Yeah, Mark says she's gone." And I said, "Are you sure?" I'm stuck in a loop. And he said, "Well, I'm on my way over there right now, and I'm packing. So if this is the world's worst April Fool's joke, there's going to be a double tap." So it wasn't a joke. She had died suddenly from either a fall or a stroke. And it would have been, from where she was and us knowing her schedule, she usually got up in the morning, walked in, put on her coffee, walked back to her computer room, and sent messages to all her kids, and then went back and got her coffee. So this would have happened right in that window when she was heading to put up her coffee. All right, scenes from an old movie. Flickering by, some so old that black and white would be more honest. For how can you remember colors of so long ago? Time is not a river, but a great placid lake, dark and deep and full of things edible and venomous, sometimes both at once. The absurdity of the plot line, the thinness of the characterizations, the heavy hand of the writer, dropping a plot twist unnecessary except in Hollywood. I sit in the darkness and watch the credits scroll 10,000 times, always finding something new, if only subtle. Memory's a lot like that. You think of a memory and you go, "Oh, that's what he meant," or that's why she did that. Breathless. Your form is no longer warm above the ambient in the room, breathless yet deathless, already having won Pascal's wager with a single word, followed by follow-through of tolerance and deep reflection upon imperfection forgiven and contemplated. Whether by method or baptism, study or revelation, a lifetime of unimaginable challenges serving as a proving ground and an inspiration to those with more than bandy words and the ability to parrot the calling of crows and the low blows taken and unforsaken. If you haven't already picked up on it, both my mother and my father were practicing Christians of deep faith. And although often we would come to blows over specific elements of theology, they stayed to the Baptist Methodist side. Dad perhaps was a little more liberal than Mom. When the Southern Baptist Church in the 60s and 70s made a hard right, I left and eventually ended up, as I am now, a liberal Quaker. So just to keep track of that, I won't get into the full family tree in terms of religious thought. It gets complicated very quickly. It's interesting in these days of coronavirus to reflect upon the fact that my mother was a polio survivor. She'd had polio as a young girl. The end result of it was just a badly twisted foot that caused her to limp. I'm sure that gave her all sorts of grief in high school. But, kids are cruel. Keeping up. Your leg twisted by polio, you always had trouble keeping up and would call after me to slow. Unnecessary now, as you run and leap, as impossible for you since childhood. And I wonder if heaven allows dancing, for I am sure Dad would welcome a turn or two. When I lived in California, particularly when I lived in Venice Beach, my parents didn't come to visit me, even though I was there for years. Basically because A, Dad didn't like to fly, and B, they were both convinced that when they would be there would be an earthquake and they'd all drown, which drove me nuts. This poem is called "You Never Made It to California." I waited in my exile to see the smiles of those at one time most crucial to my joy, before ignorance and arrogance, mine, drove me west, leaving behind all I could not carry. I could not tarry. The road was an insistent lover. Los Angeles and the high desert became my place of rest. Not quite as final as the dirt in Arnottsville, but in its own way profound and fierce. A cruel tool for separation and reflection and revolution, absolution for a life left on the backyard wash line. When will I be my own man, if not now? If not in the city that lacked the angels that did their best to raise me, to praise me until I believed my reputation, even when I knew it wasn't true. But I wasn't through, and returned because you never made it to California. You drove by but said you didn't want to feel the sway of the earth beneath your feet, and I understood. But for me it was a necessity. And finally, I think this is the final poem, isn't it? Yes. Suburban Bones. Half a life to prepare and I still wasn't ready. Not really. The feel of the living room carpet and the smell of the kitchen were wrong. Sarah seemed bewildered. That was my mom's dog. No familiar sounds of your shuffle or the clearing of your throat early in the morning before your coffee. Too many people flitting through and past on their own trajectories. The dining room table, massive altar to hungry demigods, a dozen or more at a time. Not the same. Not the same, and the name of the house will always be yours to me. Even when the buzzards and the airs pick clean their suburban bones and strangers call it their own, the ghosts will linger, even if you never really believed in them. Well, that's it. The book is Gentle Into That Good Night. I'm William F. DeVault, the U.S. National Beat Poet Laureate Emeritus. I've got the plaque up there someplace. Right above my head. And, according to Yahoo, the romantic poet of the internet. We'll have to do this again sometime. I thank you all for attending. And this will be posted shortly in several different locations. Have a great one.